known as not only the race in which this car led every lap of the race, but it'll be interesting to check his final lap time.
Before the advent of V8 supercars, Holden dealer team was the Ferrari of touring car racing. When those red and white cars were there, man, you knew that was a serious race. And they really were just iconic. And people have never forgotten them. They will remain in everyone's memory, cherished in everyone's memory for a long, long time.
Here he comes. Don't say this wasn't orchestrated. A 1-2 for the dealer team. Peter Brock in 0.5 comes across the line to win the 1984 James Hardy 1000.
You look at the way it's that those cars are revered in this day and age, you realise that it was a golden era in Australian motorsport, there's no doubt about it.
Only minutes to starting time in Australia's toughest race for standard sedan cars. Pole position on the grid following fastest practice times yesterday are the new Holden Monaros.
In Australian motorsport, no team evokes as many memories or inspires as much loyalty and passion as the one that reigned through the 70s and 80s. It was called the Holden Dealer Team, and it came into being in 1969 when Monaros battled Falcon GTs and Ford Mustangs, and Norm Beechey was the king of Australian touring car racing.
They save every ounce by...
In post-war Australia, Holdens featured on Australia's racetracks, but there was no factory-backed team.
They sold in huge numbers, and there was an enormous amount of spare parts available around the country. There were things like the Round Australia trials that were held then. The Holdens were very popular there, so they really were the iconic brand, and a lot of people wanted to race them. But in terms of getting factory support, that was another deal because they just weren't allowed to, on the face of it, in any case.
The base issue was that there was an international ban on motor racing that came out of the corporation, and that really came from the super speedway racing in the States, but trials and rallies were still an okay ground, and certainly out here in Australia the Holden company were pretty active in that area, but there was no open program of motor racing, circuit racing.
We had a gentleman called John Bagshaw who was my big chief in those days, and a very, very good promoter, and he actually saw the reason to hit the younger markets, and the younger markets were the motorsport markets, obviously, the boys and girls who loved motorsport. He saw a way of getting into it. We had the Monaro at that stage, which was a very, very good motor car and a very sporty motor car, and he really wanted to bring it into the racing side without breaking policy from the corporation, because at that stage General Motors had a policy of non-motor racing, but you could rally and rally cross, etc. So the way he sort of got the thing involved, and they did the London to Sydney and did a couple of other rallies, but then eventually he was able to see that motorsport, which was motor racing, for want of a better word, was the way to go.
Norm Beechey's former mechanic, Peter Lewis-Williams, who had moved into sales promotion at Holden, was to be the conduit between the company and John Bagshaw's motorsport ambitions.
I was put in charge of the Victorian Dealer Trials team, and we ran the Victorian Championship and the rounds of the Australian Championship in '68 with a three-car team. I'd known Harry Firth for quite some years. I first met him when I was working with Norm Beechey, and Harry ran a Holden, was also looking after Bob Jane's early model Holden. And over that period, Harry had been very closely associated with Ford. The sport was becoming more and more professional, and my feeling was that for us to progress, we really had to have a full-on manager who would run the event, who would run the team and take it to the next stage of competitiveness. And Harry at that time, after he had parted company with Ford, was running Renaults. And I asked him if he'd be interested on coming on board to pick up the Holden Dealer Trials and Rallies portfolio. And he indicated, yes, he'd certainly like to talk about it. And I talked to John Bagshaw, who was sales director at General Motors, and I said, look, we have this opportunity, and I think it's really a step that should be taken. So Bags and Harry and I had a meeting in Bags' office, and we outlined where we wanted to go. Harry nodded, we shook hands, and that's how the Holden Dealer team was founded.
I would get paid for so much per meeting, we would give you a thing, but what's the budget? I said, well, we've had a bit of a look at it and we can give you a budget of $556,000 plus the vehicles and the add-ons and that. I said, yes, right. Are we allowed to have co-sponsors? He said, yes, by all means, because he said, General Motors don't motor race and we've got to hide this. Well, for a start, I said, if you make the dealer team, it's the dealers are paying for it. It's nothing to do with General Motors. I said, he said, I will control the slush fund and everything will be done as rallying. So I said to Peter, yes, Peter, that's a go. And I went down and I met Bagshaw and we shook hands. No written deal, no, nothing. And that was it, because they couldn't put anything on paper. Not allowed to. Didn't motor race.
Firth is recognised as one of Australia's leading motorsport figures.
Firth was often referred to as the Fox, and he demonstrated some cunning in his recruitment. He chose two young drivers yet to make their mark in motorsport, Colin Bond and Peter Brock.
Amazing, really. I mean, Harry Firth, beyond any of his genius in engineering terms, was his ability to spot talent very early. Even back in his Ford days, he was the guy who spotted Fred Gibson, who was a young driver on his way up. He put him in the co-driving role at Bathurst in '67, and Fred did an absolutely remarkable job in his first drive at Bathurst. And from then on, Gibson became one of the top touring car drivers. Same applied to the way he picked Colin Bond out of obscurity. He was rallying in a Mitsubishi Colt in the late '60s. Firth spotted that talent, brought him into the Holden dealer team, and Bond flowered in exactly the same way that Brock did too. Harry Firth was extraordinary at picking great young talent at an early time. And you look at what Brock and Bond did when they became the Holden dealer team drivers. Just phenomenal success in both race and rally.
I said, I've had a good look around and there's a little bloke called Bond in New South Wales. We've got to have rally people as well, remember, and it's predominantly a rally scene. So Bond will be our lead rally driver, but he'll also be, he's a very good race driver and he'll do exactly what he's told. So we'll have him. There's a long-haired bastard drives a sports sedan thing called Brock. Yeah. Now, I can make something out of him. He's just what I want, but I'm going to have to do a lot of work on it, you know, to indoctrinate him and get him to my way of thinking. He hasn't got my way of thinking at the moment.
I couldn't believe it when I got the phone call from Harry Firth, how he'd even know my name, how he even knew I existed on the planet. Anyway, come down, have a look, see what we're doing. Got a car for you. And I walked into the workshop there and they were pretty, shall we call it, workmanlike environment. Car magazines stacked up everywhere and old bits and pieces from old projects just stuck on the wall up here and there. And space sort of cleared and here's these pristine Monaro GTS 350s just sitting there. Wow, you know, they're hot off the press and Harry didn't say too much. I never believed, though, I was actually going to drive this car until I stood there and watched the sign rider mask it up and write B-R-O-C-K on that mudguard. It was just a magic moment. I can see it right now, just sitting there. There's my name going on it. I wasn't going to ask anyone if I was actually going to drive it or not because they might have changed their mind, you know, but when I went on that car, I thought, yes. In a sense, I was the son he never had. And he set pretty high standards. And I think he recognised in me a certain rebelliousness, this pretty wild young kid that sort of just got out there and wanted to do all these things. And he thought, you've been gifted with a natural talent, but you could go one way or the other. You could easily just sort of waste it. You could be enamoured with the glamour of motor racing, the seductive side of it all. And Harry wasn't into that. Harry was a very down-to-earth sort of team manager that wanted results. And his advice to me was always, listen, Cock, make every post a winner, which I took to being, OK, I've got an opportunity here, don't blow it.
Harry was his own own man. Harry had one idea or one way of doing things. It had to be Harry's way, whether you're a mechanic, whether you're driving the cars or towing the cars, or you're a driver. It was done Harry's way, no doubt about it. We didn't like it much at the time. A lot of us thought it was a bit hard, but looking back now, Harry was dead right. I mean, he could instruct his drivers exactly how he wanted the cars driven. You had to be very kind on the cars in those days to get them through Bathurst for 500 miles. Sure, you go to Bathurst and you could lead the race for 10 laps. 10 laps you're in the pits because your brakes were smouldering, you'd burnt your tyres out or whatever. So to get the cars through Bathurst for 500 miles took an art, and Harry knew how to do that.
Peter Brock getting last-minute instructions from his pit manager.
With Brock, I couldn't give him much time at all in the car, but I kept telling him, Peter, this is what you do, and this is how you go. And I sat them all down and said, this is what you do at Bathurst, this is how you attack it, this is how you do each corner. If someone there, you do this, you do that. It's all written down, by the way. And you know, they had the whole lot on a silver plate. For instance, when you go over the top of the mountain at Bathurst, you go over full chat, and you look just over the hill, and you can see two hills and a tree in the middle. Now you aim for that and go over full chat. You can't stop until you get to the dipper, but that's not the point. You're going in exactly the right direction to take the next corner.
You told him not to use the brakes too, didn't you?
Don't use the brakes. No, the brakes are only there for the last, you know, to get you set up for the corner. You use the corner to slow you down and get you in the right path.
Harry he's quite adamant that you couldn't use the brakes. You had to do whatever you could, give the car a flick in the corner, let it float through, do all those sorts of things, but do not use the brakes, because the brakes had a limited life. And he figured if you could learn to drive without brakes and go fast there, it was going to be a pretty good technique, because you'd float the car into corners, you wash off speed with the tyres sort of just scrubbing along nicely, and those important things, those brakes, were there if you absolutely needed them. We reckon they're good for about 3 hard applications, and beyond that you'd say, she's all over Red Rover. So it was a technique that I learnt. It took a lot of discipline. It was very easy to sort of say, let's jump on the brakes. And I can still feel that brake pedal pulsing under my feet and the car not stopping to this day. It was rather an interesting experience to drive the Monaro GTS 350 in competition at the mountain.
The largest crowd in the history of the race has come to see what promises to be the most thrilling motor race of its kind ever staged, with main interest in the battle for line honours between the new and specially built Ford Falcon GTHOs and the car that won convincingly last year, the Holden Monaro GTS.
The first time Brock and Bond raced for the team was at the 1969 Hardy Ferodo Bathurst 500. They were driving the Monaro GTS 350 and were up against the mighty new Falcon GTHOs of Alan Moffat, the Gagan brothers, Fred Gibson and Barry Seaton. The rookies did very well, Brock finishing third with Des West and Colin Bond covering himself in glory, winning the race with co-driver Tony Roberts.
We qualified, I think, 7th on the grid, and once the race settled down, we were running at the front for the rest of the day and winning the race. It was the first time I'd probably had a very competitive touring car anyway, and particularly to go to Bathurst. I'd been to Bathurst prior to that. And I found it astonishingly easy, actually, to win the race that particular year.
Gagan is clear leader after 20 miles, and with him now, David Mackay's GTHO. Then the GTSs of Cook and Bond, the McPhee Falcon and the West Monaro.
It really kicked my career off, I guess, as a racing driver. We'd been rallying and also doing a lot of racing and hill climbs, but that was with my own cars, of course. So once that happened and we won that particular race, we were then sort of cemented into the Holden dealer team with myself and Peter Brock. To then, you know, for the next 7 years, we were just virtually professional racing drivers. And sure, it was a turning point in my career.
Colin Bond pilots a careful course around the final lap, taking no chances of spoiling the patient efforts of himself and co-driver Tony Roberts at this stage of the event. 6 hours, 32 minutes, 25 seconds their time for the 500 miles, just over 12 minutes better than last year's Holden record for the race.
Prior to joining the Holden dealer team, Colin Bond had mainly shown his skill as a rally driver in a Mitsubishi Colt. But Firth saw much more in Bond. He held the view that rallying gave drivers the concentration necessary for endurance races.
What it really meant was that we didn't really have to work, except we weren't being paid an awful lot of money, but we used to go down and do an awful lot of work on the cars at Harry's, for argument's sake. And he'd often ring up and just say, look, if you want your car ready for Sandown or Lakeside or whatever it is, you better get yourself down here, you know, because we're running late. And you do that. And then, of course, you drive the cars interstate yourself. You know, we say we're works drivers, but we actually drove the works. You know, going back to 69, I think we actually physically drove the cars to and from the race meeting. Not me particularly, but the boys did. Not long after that, though, we started, you know, getting trailers, and we only had Bedfords or, you know, or Holden station wagons, whatever it was, and you'd have a trailer on the back and off you go to a race meeting. Often only myself, my wife, and probably Harry and one of the boys, and that'd be it, you know, and we thought it was very professional in those days.
Colin had done everything. He'd been in Motorcana. In fact, I think he was a New South Wales champion at that. He'd driven single-seaters. I can remember him in a Lynx Peugeot at Catalina Park, supercharged car. He'd been a rally driver. In fact, Rano Aaltonen said he could do it on a world stage. He was sensational. Very few people realise how good Colin Bond was. I can remember the first time he got into a Formula 5000 single-seater. It was a wet practice day at Warwick Farm. He was seconds faster than people like Frank Matic and Max Stewart who'd been driving the things for years. And he said, I thought I was going slowly. It felt really slow, so I just kept going. I mean, he was an enormous talent, Colin Bond, of widespread talent, as I say, could drive almost anything.
Bondy could just drive. It didn't matter what it was, if it was a panel van or a Monaro or an XU1 or whatever, and you could always hear that laugh of his somewhere in the forest at around a campfire, or, you know, in the back of the pit somewhere as someone's regaling some sort of story. Here's Bondy, ha, 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 you know, and you hear him to this day doing the same thing. But, oh, he could drive, and he was just a fantastic natural driver.
Although the team was very professional by 1970 standards, things were quite different from the way we now define professional. Head mechanic Ian Tate.
We didn't have a trailer, we had a panel van, 253 panel van, and that was it. We never had a trailer, we drove the car to the meeting. We continued driving cars to meetings up to into 1972. We had a budget to run the cars, but we never had a budget to buy trailers or transporters or anything like that at all.
You often got the drivers to take cars to the track on the road, drive them themselves?
Quite often, it's the only way they got there. And after all, it was experience for them. They could get used to their car while I was driving it up there, couldn't they?
Brock runs rallycross in a vehicle as extroverted as its driver. A one-standard Tirana with the radiators in the boot to improve mid-air balance, engine back 2 feet to effect better weight distribution, and supercharged for a power gain of nearly 100 brake horsepower.
I remember the prototype XU1 became the rallycross car, and it was registration number KLD 158. And I remember that car eventually was modified fairly heavily for rallycross, engine shifted back, stuff like that. But, you know, Harry still insisted that I drive that car to Sandown for the Sports Sedan race. And there I'm driving along this car going blub, 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 in the highway, you know, and here's this car registration number, rego stickers, the whole deal, driving down to Sandown. He just loved the whole idea of it. It was a bit of a quirky thing to do, and it used to drive the opposition crazy, because they'd look at it and think, well, you've got to have a trailer. And Harry eschewed trailers and things like that.
Another young driver working with the Holden dealer team at the time was Larry Perkins, who was often given the task of driving race cars to and from interstate circuits from Melbourne.
He got caught coming back from Adelaide at very high speed, but that was Larry. Remember the first time Larry before he joined us as a mechanic, Harry gave him a rally car to take out and have a drive of an XU1 one night. He come back with these horrible marks all over the car. Harry took one look at how to fit. Larry come to a T intersection and couldn't stop. He was at pretty high speed. Went through the intersection, through a barbed wire fence and into a paddock. And these barbed wire marks were all over the top of the car, the front of the car, and it was a fair old mess. Harry was not impressed.
Larry would go from A to B, and he would figure, because no speed restrictions in those days, unrestricted speeds out on the highway. Larry would get out there and he'd just go. And we'd all have records about how long it took to get from A to B, etc. And Larry would get out there and he would go, anyone could beat Larry getting from A to B was quick. He would go so fast sometimes that when he called into a service station to refuel, the panel van where he was towing the race car with, he would even, I remember one stage he never even got the receipts to give to Harry Firth's brother Norm, which was a big no-no because Larry couldn't get the money back because it would interfere with the precious seconds ticking away and the record was at stake. So some very funny things like that happened.
On one occasion, Perkins was given a prototype Tirana with a V8 engine shoehorned into the engine bay to shake down on the nation's highways.
I couldn't tell Larry to take the XU1 V8 prototype and drive it at 7,000 in top on the road, which is 160 miles an hour. But I would tell him to go to such and such a minute, knowing full well that that's what he would do. And also, when you see some of the stories, what he's written about what he actually did there, you know, turning up at the local dance and giving all the local hoons joyrides in the car. Yeah, that wasn't part of the ninja. But if they were going to break it, he would have broken it.
We had to do a few Ks to sort of sort a few things out. And I remember at one stage Larry driving that thing across past a little desert there near Oyen, which was his old stamping ground. I believe Larry actually called into the local dancer on the way through at one stage just to thrill the natives, this XU2, and lit it up for the mob outside the local memorial hall or whatever it was. But they were quick cars. I remember Larry telling me he wound it up there, one of those big, long, fast, flat straights there, and it was just... And I think the speed was something in the order of in excess of 160 mile per hour. And that was for a standard road car. Can you believe it? It was fast.
One of your top mechanics, Ian Tate, I believe, also got himself into trouble in your prototype V8 Tirana.
Well, I let him drive it home for a week, you see. And so he thought he'd get his mate and have a bit of a hoon around the thing. And the police chased him. They had no hope of catching him, which he cleared off, you see, but he didn't even tell me he wasn't game to. But I heard about it.
Jeremo's made 3 cars as prototypes, and we had one at work for a while to drive backwards. I had a car to drive backwards and forwards to work, and I took it home 2 or 3 weeks. I took a guy over the road for a drive in it one night, and we went up off Moriac Road in East Burwood, and there's a cop car hiding around the corner, but luckily we got away from him and he didn't catch us. I was worried about, I think the car was still registered as a 6-cylinder, so I was worried about that part of it.
The first Tirana was released by Holden in 1969. The smaller car was immediately thought suitable for rallying, but in it, Harry Firth also saw the potential for a race car.
So much of it was being driven by what Harry Firth wanted on the racetrack. Because if you think back to the late 60s, where you had Ford with the Falcon GTHO program, Holden were running the Monaro, the big V8 Monaro. So you had these 2 big, heavy, immensely powerful V8 cars with tyres about that skinny, no brakes. Harry looked at this and said, well, we're going down a blind path here. We're just going to get faster and faster. We're going to have more and more problems with brakes, more and more problems with tyre wear, more and more problems with fuel consumption, etc. So he went to GMH and said, look, the direction we've got to go is this way. We've got to go small, we've got to go nimble, we've got to go light. A car that's lighter on tyre wear, lighter on brake wear, lighter on fuel consumption, smaller frontal area so it doesn't have to push so much air, can compensate for the smaller engine. That's what Harry suggested, and that's the way GMH went.
The way that the motor racing regulations were structured at the time is you had to race what you sold. And that area was becoming pretty intense, and I guess was fueled by the release of the Falcon GTHOs. And principally I think it was really Bill Steinhagen and John Bagshaw, particularly Bill Steinhagen, who said, I am not prepared to build a road car that's going to have the performance characteristics required to run competitively with the Falcons to release it to the public. He said, I think it can be done another way. And that's where the concept of the Tirana XU1 was born. And Harry had a big input in that as well, because the base question is, can a terrific little car beat a Falcon GTHO? And as it panned out, yes, it could.
Round of the Manufacturers' Championships, same circuit, Warwick Farm, and the man out in front is Colin Bond. His car's the Monaro's baby brother, the Holden Tirana GTR XU1.
The first car came off the line. I took to Warwick Farm. Nope, no pit crew, nothing. Tyres on the back seat, a couple of people up there to help me, George Shepherd and that, rally people. And said to Bondi, yeah, never driven an XU1, have a drive of this. Oh, yeah, I like this. So we fronted at Warwick Farm, and Janie and Moffat and all those are about, bloody toy cars now, racing toy cars, eh? Yeah, yes. So we knocked them off in the race, one by one, down the creek, and the under brakes was the quickest way, you know, one by one, bum, 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 cleared off, won the race. I said, just put your order into the local dealers, fellas. Got in the car and went home.
But the blokes of crowd will watch is Colin Bond. He's back there in fourth in the little Tirana, and he's clinging on like a leech. That's good brakes and handling for you.
We had a great motor car in the Monaro. It was a super strong car. The brakes were fairly marginal. I mean, they were not bad brakes for their day, but when you compare to today's brakes, or even the XU1s had the same brakes as we had on the Monaro, for argument's sake, but the car was probably, you know, 2/3 the weight or something like that, so it was a lot lighter motor car, a lot more nimble, easier on the tyres. We also rallied in those days, and I was rallying the Monaro, and I thought the Monaro was a fantastic car to rally, but it was a bit big. You got more punches because it was big, and you were sliding into things sideways and that. Once we got the XU1s, they were a much faster motor car, particularly on dirt roads and things where you're not quite sure where you're going, of course, and you could drive them flat out. They weren't as wide. We didn't have the same problems we had with the Monaro, and we were able to win the Rally Championship at least 3 times. I did, and I think the XU1s won it more than that, because I know Lange won it one year, who was in the Holden dealer teams in those days.
It also takes
While Colin Bond took out the Australian Rally Championship in 1971 in an XU1, Peter Brock was having fun in local rallycross events and was just about unbeatable. On the circuits, however, the little Tiranas had trouble matching the powerful GTHO Falcons. Initially, Firth had hoped his V8 version of the Tirana XU1 would fit the bill.
So I said, we've got to have some oomph, and the easiest way to do it is just put the V8 in the Tirana. It'll be quite easy. Now, you can't do it. I said, how about if you let me have a go? So I pick up the bits and pieces. We had a 4.3, which is the same size. Put it all in 6 weeks, and it's a goer, and the program went on, and it's history, but it was eventually canned, and that would have won every mortal thing. It was just so good. So we have to get back to Bathurst again and make a 6-cylinder in a hurry. So we used the wheels and the better brakes and the rest of the things off the... Because we'd sourced 200 cars, right? All the stuff is there to be made. So we just put the cars together as they were with everything else, and just instead of that we made another 6-cylinder with another cam, and they had the bigger carburetors and quite a few other things on it as well. And fronted that at Bathurst, and it won. And it won not so much because of that the car was much better than what it was, but I had sourced these new wheels, and Brock's way of doing that happened before, you see, and we had a brand new colour scheme, which when we did it, the 71 cars were terrible. We made this new scheme, and that's where the Bathurst colour scheme came from. The cars looked faster, but we didn't do anything mechanically to those cars before that. But we did do a heap to the Bathurst cars. To cut a long story short, they handled twice as good as they did before with the wider rubber and this new type of rubber and things what we used.
And the cars are coming out now. It's a wet and dismal scene, really, but still a great sense of excitement in the air. This is Bathurst.
72 Bathurst was special. Driving up there, Brock experimented with slipstreaming. When he got up there, he was very focused. For 2 or 3 weeks before the event, he'd come to work every day, botting a meal, or lunch money off everyone in the place because he never had any money in his back pocket. He'd sit in the car for hours at a time. Even the car was on stands or we were working on the car, he'd sit in the car staring at the car, focusing on the car. He wanted minor adjustments made, we'd make them, but he was very focused on that win right from the 3 or 4 weeks before the event. Driving up there, crikey, he'd done 500 race miles before he got to Bathurst. He was that sharp, and as soon as he got to Bathurst, he was on top. His driving in that race was just incredible. I mean, in those days, 500 miles, there was no relief driver. He was lucky to get a half a mouthful of Coke at the pit stops. You didn't give him too much to drink because he wanted to stop and go to the toilet. Didn't do that in those days. There was no drink containers. As I say, if he was lucky, he got a half a mouthful of Coke at the pit stop. That was it. But I don't think anyone would have beaten Peter on that day.
I remember Ian Tate and I with the XU1s in 1972 driving the cars from Harry's workshop in Melbourne all the way to Bathurst, and we got to around about West Wyalong. We thought these cars are run in, so Tatey and I let loose. There was a rather strange side effect to this, so because I got through Cowra and I was sitting behind Ian, and he was driving rather briskly, and he went through some roadworks between Cowra and Blaney. And I was sitting behind him, as I mentioned. Next thing, I had no lights, nothing. Rocks, smashed everything. Tatey's in front thinking, Brocky's playing silly buggers. I'll lose him. So he started going faster. And I'm there going, I've got no headlights. Now, we actually got to, eventually he woke up to it after some time. We got to Bathurst, went straight to Bathurst Motors, and new headlights, new blinker lenses, new windscreen. Harry was not happy.
And Brock's got him, slipped through on the run down to Forest Elbow. Moore's looking for a way past too. The Falcon's definitely slower across the top where it's treacherously slippery. Moffat will pull out the stops down the straight. Now let's see who leads past the pits. Yes, it's Moffat again.
It was really the David and Goliath. I mean, it was a 6-cylinder XU1 against the big 350 Ho Fords, which... And let's be honest, they used to have a saying at Bathurst, you can't beat cubic inches. Only cubic money beats cubic inches. And, the big Ho would be going up that back hill with all the torque, and Peter would be pulling back, and then he'd catch them on the top and pass them down the straight. And it was really a David and Goliath thing.
Brock has shown that he and the Tirana have been saving something for a lot of effort. And down they come, the second last time, Peter Brock, at the wheel of a car that on this track, this day, has recorded a clash victory. 1 lap to go.
It was my year in 72, though. I mean, the battle I had with Moffat was a terrific battle. It was raining. It was difficult. Slipping and sliding on intermediate tyres and hand groove slicks and stuff like that, but it just worked. And at the end of the day, when I finished up getting the box of chocolates, I had a totally different understanding about what I could do in life. And I suppose to my, the peer group viewed me differently. Media did. And it just changed my life. It changed my life in more ways than just racing at the mountain. It was, hang on, I can now do these things.
In 1972, the Holden dealer team also won the Australian Rally Championship for the 2nd year running, courtesy of Colin Bond. In the following year, the rivalry between Peter Brock and Alan Moffat was at its peak, with Moffat's GTHO and Brock's XU1 duelling for most rounds of the Australian Touring Car Championship. Moffat ended up taking the title with Brock second. And then at Bathurst, now 1,000 kilometres, an in-form Brock teamed up with Doug Chivvis to try and win his second title at the mountain.
The late, great Doug Chivvis, 1973. Mix up with pit stop information, 1 extra lap, and Chivo headed off on that fateful final lap, got to the top of the mountain, spluttered and coughed, came down the mountain okay, obviously, got to Murray's Corner and decided that the car wouldn't be able to coast into the pits and he'd better try and clutch start it. As we know nowadays, a car will easily roll into the pit area from the speed it can maintain through Murray's, but we didn't know. And Chivo, of course, staggered up that rise, got out and started pushing. Now, it was a strange set of circumstances because if a car is blocking the racetrack, the officials have the ability of going out there and clearing it. If a car spins on a corner, they go and they shift it. They can do things. And of course, that was basically impeding the progress of any car wanting to come into the pits. So they could have pushed him out of the way, but something said, no, you've got to push that car yourself. And we, the pit crew, or the people involved in the team, for some reason, we figured we weren't allowed to touch that car, and it was quite true, I believe, that until it got to a certain line, which was the line marking the beginning of the pit area as it is. So Shivo staggered up there and we, come on, Shivo, you can do this, Shivo. Well, Doug Shivers was around about 60 kilo, ringing wet, max, wiry little guy. He struggled. Now, when he finally got to that line, I remember seeing a picture of me going down there and getting him and flinging him out of the way, and he spun away and fell into the arms of some waiting ambulance guy where he actually had a heart flutter. He actually did. Like, he sat there to keep him there for a while. Mind you, he did survive another 35 or 40 years. So, but Shivo was simply obeying instructions and didn't know any different. Now, when we pushed the car into the pits, got in the car, cranked it up, I think I finished second with I think I had a bit of a flat tyre towards the end. It slowed me down. I couldn't quite nail whoever was in front, but yeah, that was one that got away. We had a quick car. That was the quickest XU1 there. That was a rocket, yeah.
Bond, he's held on to his second, but Brock, driving close to the limit, will obviously be right with him before too long.
For the record, Brock wrung the Tirana's neck in his last driving stint and ended up second to Moffat at Bathurst, with Colin Bond third. In 1974, the Ford Motor Company withdrew its factory support from touring car racing, and as a result, Holden dominated. HDT's frontline weapon was still the XU1, but it was about to be superseded by the V8-engined SLR 5000, and then the full race development version, the L34.
In 74, it became LH. Now, the last part of 73, we used the LH SLR 5000. It was absolute dog and useless. So he just said, you've got to fix it. So instead of letting us fix it, they gave the engine to Repco to fix. But Repco ran it on the dyno, they didn't run on the road, so they've got a 6-pint oil sump on it, haven't they? Which is we'd made a sump for the XU1 V8, which fitted in there and everything, 1.5 gallons. You know, it was 6, 7 litres. Why fiddle around with what they had there? And that was the whole thing with the thing. No room under mudguards, yeah, boulevard ride, square-looking boxy body, heavy, useless.
I guess the XU1, if you put it in perspective, we went to races like Warwick Farm. I don't think we're ever beaten at Warwick Farm by the bigger Fords. But the bigger Fords could out-qualify, say at Bathurst and Sandown and so on. So when we went to some other circuits, the XU1, you're always starting behind the 8-ball. And then as the race progressed, you would just sort of move up and pass, and you may win the race. When we got the L34, we were back on equal terms again with the Fords as far as performance goes. The brakes initially were not that good, I guess. You know, they sort of got better as things went on. But I mean, the Fords were in the same situation. I mean, when you look back again, you know, with drum brakes on the back and disc on the front, which we all had in those days, there was always going to be a problem with overheating the back brakes at some stage. Then but the L34 was a good car. It was a little bit smaller than the Ford. We were able to win a lot of races with it as well. And it was an improvement from the XU1.
Initially, the new L34 V8 Tirana often qualified well, but lasting the race distance was difficult. Oil surging from one side of the engine to the other was a problem, and that wasn't all.
You mustn't drift it, because if you did, all the oil ran out the side and you're in trouble. And you mustn't give it a big hit with one wheel up in the air in a corner, because it would break the axle on that side with all the load on it, with the locker lift. You know, you had to be very, very careful with them. And they had no brakes, really.
The other issue was it had a differential which had a heritage back to the E.J. Holden, the 1963 grey motor, pre-EH Holden engine. Now imagine that diff lasted with an E.J., but all of a sudden we stuck a 308 Holden in it with 340 horses or whatever. And those side gears were not happy little side gears. So you had to drive it very carefully. You had also an axle shaft to fit into those side gears, which was very, very small. So if you hit that throttle coming through the dipper, for instance, or in the middle of a corner while the back end was cocked up in the air, you could snap the back axle just like that, like a carrot, just bang. So you had to be very disciplined. You had to change gears carefully because of the engine. You had to be neat through a corner. You didn't want to throw it into a corner because you had this problem with the oiling. So you didn't want to get oil surge. You didn't want to hurt the gearbox because it essentially had the Aussie 4-speed gearbox out of the XU1 Tirana, and gears would get chewed up. You had this baby diff. So you had to be careful if you want to win races with an L34. But I think anyone who drove those cars became a better driver for it because you had to develop something called mechanical sympathy or you weren't going to last.
Despite the fragility of the L34s, the early successes with the XU1 ensured Brock would win the driver's title that year. At HDT, the Manufacturers' Championship. But as always, the icing on the cake was Bathurst, and things looked good when Brock and Bond qualified 4 seconds a lap faster than the next best.
And Bond has a long lead as they go for the first of 163 times up Mountain Straight.
Early on, they ran in formation out front and looked unbeatable, until Bond was black flagged for repairs because of oil escaping from a loose sump. With 2/3 of the race completed, Brock was leading by about 36 kilometres.
We were doing it easy. And I was thinking, OK, we're just being very careful to nurse this thing along. And Harry was very strict, you know, back off, don't go fast, etc., etc.
And talking of things going down the drain, look at the smoke issuing from the tail of the leader. Now, this is the Peter Brock, Brian Sampson car.
6 laps up around about lap 100-ish. And I mean, I remember sitting in the pits for 6 laps and the guys were tinkering and they said, you're still in front. Which wasn't bad. Imagine doing it in this era.
And Brock is in far more trouble than ever Colin Bond has been in. That's pouring out his exhaust pipe.
I wasn't driving according to my own gut instinct. My gut instinct was this car's not happy. What happened is that one half of the one set of 4 pistons burnt out, which were connected up with the inlet tract to one of the carburettors. If you measured the carburettor synchronisation at idle, they were both aligned perfectly, and at full throttle they were, but during the process they opened up at different rates. One opened faster than the other, etc. So it was a weird thing, but anyway, that's the way it worked. And of course it meant that at that particular throttle opening, one set of pistons were running very lean. One set of pistons were running normal. So that was the end of the race, really, and I learned a very important lesson out of that, and that is that when you're driving a car, you've got to go with your own instincts about what that car feels like to you at that time. And if you've got to back off, you've got to find your own way of nursing the car, which might be changing gears early. It might be not using the brakes. It might be doing a lot of things like that in order to give a car an easier time of achieving the result. But one thing I do know is that when you've got engines that aren't perfectly synchronised on par throttle, you've got to go with instinct and say, keep it flat, don't let it run ragged and sound bad.
At the end of 1974, Peter Brock left the Holden dealer team and the autocratic style of Harry Firth to run as a privateer.
By this time, Peter was very much his own person. I don't blame him. You know, he's a young bloke, he's got ambition, he wants to do things his way. I wanted him to still keep doing them my way, you see, and we're having a few problems with that. But however, the big problem was when he married Miss Australia and tried to be Mr. Australia. That was a distinct mistake, and I think he would be the first to admit that.
Despite Brock's absence, it was business as usual at HDT, and Colin Bond continued winning rallies and headed towards his first driver's title in the 1975 Touring Car Championship.
There was manufacturers' championships that we won, and there was lots of rallies that we're winning. There was rallycross that we were competing in at the time as well, and winning in that. So it was a period when, you know, the cars were going extremely well. The competition was fairly severe, even in rallying, you know, with Renault and Nissan and all that type of thing. We're in there tooth and nail as well, and I think it was Volvo and some other quite a few manufacturers. But we sort of had the car that was capable of beating them and winning. And not only that, we were able to do quite a few events overseas. You know, we used to go to New Caledonia and do rallies there, and New Guinea and all sorts of things up to the Philippines. So it was a nice time, you know, that we could actually compete, you know, in Australia, of course, and sort of do these trips around other countries as well.
If I'm up to it, I'll run a fast race all day.
In 1977, Colin Bond defected to the Ford camp and the team was reorganised, with John Harvey joining the driver lineup alongside Charlie O'Brien.
Oh, look, it was a big deal. I mean, Holden, being a major manufacturer in this country and were looking to expand their motor racing activities, I was pretty excited about that. However, I had a lot of experience in all forms of motorsport prior to that period. I mean, I'd driven in 5 or 6 Australian Grand Prix and won some national championships. I'd driven lots of open wheel cars, open cockpit cars and so on. And I'd had some vast experience in the Bob Jane organisation with Holden cars and all sorts of other things. But nevertheless, no, it was a big deal and I was really quite looking forward to it. And as it turned out, it was a very long period of time in my career.
There they are, 2 abreast over the last hump, down into the braking area now.
1977 was a year of Ford domination, with Moffat and Bond in their 2-door Falcons. In a disgruntled Holden camp, a new version of the Tirana was being tested. The A9X had 4-wheel disc brakes, stronger axles, a new differential, revised suspension, and a racing gearbox.
All the initial work for the A9X was done on my own car, and I would be in the garage and we'd do something or other, and I would go down Auburn Road, down to the Toorak Road interchange on the freeway, turn onto the freeway. You went round the first bend and 3/4 mile up was the outlet back to Auburn again. So by the turn of the road, I'd have 145 miles an hour on the clock, and I would take the thing out and go back and put it in the other shop and see if anyone turned up to look for it. We did that 2 or 3 times a week, and we'd do it at night time and that. So that was the test run. But it would do, on the road, it would do 170 miles an hour, no trouble at all. There's just one small problem then, that if you look down where the front doors were hinged, the distortion and everything, you would see a gap there of about half an inch where it would be sort of stressed open and the air would be coming in there. So we had to fix the body shell up quite a bit so that it didn't do that.
For Holden, the famous staged 1-2 finish by Moffat and Bond at Bathurst told the story of the year, and Harry Firth decided he had had enough.
I said, enough's enough. Each October I would write a white paper, what was going to happen, what's happened for that year, what was going to happen for the next year. And I said for the next year, which was 77, I said, if you don't do this, do some development, do these things, you're going to get done. So when they started getting done in a big way, they tried to blame me. It's all my fault, you see. And I said, get out your paper, read that. You read it? Yeah. Well, enough's enough. Yeah, I'm off. Thank you very much.
In a special qualifying session, Brock has become the fastest man ever to drive a touring car around Bathurst.
It was time for a major rethink at HDT, and that meant bringing Peter Brock back into the fold and the recruitment of a new style of team boss, John Shepherd, who had previously worked with Norm Beachy, Pete Gagan and Bob Jane.
I knew it would be, when John Shepherd joined the team, I knew it would be a success because, see, I'd worked with John before at Bob Jane Racing, and I knew his capabilities. He was a very pragmatic engineer, very talented, but not only from an engineering point of view. He was, you know, someone that everything had to be spick and span, and the presentation was vital, important, and he brought all of those qualities to HDT. So I knew what it was going to be like, and it was just like night and day.
Harry didn't really get that much concerned about presentation. In fact, it'd be fair to say that Harry deliberately set about being a little bit enigmatic, quirky, controversial. He didn't mind just sort of fiddling around with an old oily rag and there the car. Well, the car would do perfectly well, look okay, but it wasn't pristine. Sheppo turned up and that car was immaculate. He would have the guys sitting there blackening the tyres, polishing the wheel rims, brass on the magnesium, you know, on the magnesium wheels. And the cars were just beautiful. And they'd come out there onto the grid, and I think a lot of teams were beaten before they started.
I'm very strong on presentation, and my reason for that is if you present the cars really well and they fail, people say, oh, well, bad luck. But if you present them badly and they fail, people say, what do you expect? Look at the way they're presented. So it's always been important to me. Plus, I like the look of them when they're nice and clean. So it really was, as you say, chalk and cheese. That was the way I've always operated with race cars. I don't know if I like polishing the wheels, but I like the result of polishing the wheels and all that.
It just created a buzz and excitement within Holden and all of the supporting sponsors such as Philip Morris in those days and Castrol and so on. And everyone got really excited, and that excitement flowed through into the actual activities on the racetrack. And we were hugely successful and in that period.
Even though Brock was welcomed back into the HDT fold, he was not given preferential treatment over the team's other driver, John Harvey. And for his first race, he was challenged a little.
When I arrived at the race team, I really had to prove myself. And I remember going to Sandown for the inaugural race for Holden, Marlborough Holden dealer team in January 1978. And everyone had the two-door A9X hatchbacks, and I had the four-door. And the four-door was not the preferred article. It was sort of thought, ugh. Anyway, I had to race with it, so I won using the four-door, and I think Shebo figured, oh, if you can win right from the four-door, we'll give you a hatchback. So from there on, I had a hatchback, but I had to earn my stripes, I can tell you.
I remember the first race we went to at Sandown, and Brock was... We were saying, what do you want us to do to the car, Brock? Oh, we'll move the seat or we'll change it. No, don't change anything. And his attitude was, you don't have to do anything. I'm going to win this race regardless. And when the race started, Pete Gagan passed him, and I said to Bruce Nowacki, oh, that's not too good. He said, don't worry, Brock will pass him again. And that's what happened. Brock passed him again because Nowacki was aware of how Brock's mental attitude was to such things, and he just wasn't long that he'd passed him and went on to win the race. And that was with a car that was demonstrably inferior to what we finished up having not long afterwards, you know. It was the old four-door, and they didn't want to put Harv's nose out of joint by putting Brock in his car and so forth, and the result couldn't have been better in the sense that we didn't even have to give Peter the best car we had.
With its new uniforms and a new level of professionalism, the Holden dealer team also worked on the hearts and minds of Holden fans. Public relations was the name of the game.
Peter and I went to shopping centres on a Friday night in various states when we were racing there, and would get up on stage and invite the crowd. We'd have a bit of fun together, have competitions, and they grew and they grew and they grew, and we did so many of those and marketed the team, and then started selling apparel, which was unheard of in those days. So, yeah, it was big, and it got bigger and bigger.
OK, here we have the race lead change with Peter Brock, Australian touring car champion, taking over the front.
The Holden dealer team's presence may have loomed large in 1978, but it was not just hype. On the track, it walked the talk. Brock won the Australian Touring Car Championship. The team won the manufacturer's title, and at one round at Wanneroo, HDT cars finished first, second and third.
Yes, it probably will never happen again, I suppose, when you look at the way that teams are set up these days, with two cars mainly being it. Three-car team, Wayne Negus in the third car, local boy. It was a staggeringly good result, and one which, as you said, goes down in the annals of motorsport history.
I just felt really, really proud that it happened, and now it's the grandchildren who who sort of say, oh, we didn't know you did this part, and that is sort of the effect that it has on me currently, but it was nice.
At the big race, the team started with high hopes, and the combination of Brock and a New Zealand driver called Jim Richards didn't disappoint in the A9X.
Jimmy was terrific because he would just rock up, wouldn't say much. You'd say, what do you want me to do? You'd say, get in the car, go around here, do 10 laps, get a feel for it all, put in a quick lap, qualify, come back in. He'd just go and do all that and come back in. What next? just go and sit down and have a cup of tea, Richo. And we'll give you a yell when you're next got to do something. So it was a very laid-back, easygoing sort of team atmosphere. And as I mentioned earlier, John Shepherd had this philosophy that you prepared the car in the workshop. So we went up there and we never touched those cars. We might have adjusted the stabiliser bar, put new tyres on them, bled the brakes, new pads, something like that, but that's all we did. The cars were prepped. And unless someone ran the car off the road and smashed it, I mean, we didn't ever have to do anything.
Everything's in good shape through the final left-hander, the open spaces of Conrod Straight. And Peter Brock is headed for victory, the checkered flag for the 1978 Hardy Ferodo 1000. Not worrying about terminal speed, how far he can get through the radar trap and what speed that he'll achieve in this last lap. This is as an important lap as the lap he cut in qualifying. Coming down to the final corner where everyone in pit lane is standing to salute a driver who deserves to win here today. John Harvey has dropped back behind Brock, so they're not shooting for a 1-2 camera photo finish, which it wouldn't be. The last corner comes up. The checkered flag unfolds for the 1978 champion, Peter Brock.
Ford withdrew its support for motorsport in 1979, and in a Holden-dominated competition, A9X Tiranas continued their winning ways. But the Holden dealer team had to take a backseat to Bob Morris, who took out the Australian Touring Car Championship ahead of Brock and Harvey in second and third. However, there was no one who could compete with Brock at Bathurst that year when he again teamed with Jim Richards.
79 was the classic in a lot of ways, and I guess whether, well, I'll tell you anyway, whether Brock minds or not, but I've long felt, as I said to you before, that all that stuff is attitude. And Brock walked in one day when we had an engine on the dyno, which was his engine, and it was a really, really strong engine. And he said, "Oh, that's my engine, Chepper." I said, yes, it's your engine. So when it went in the car, Brock just knew that he had such a good engine, and I said to him, we don't really want to drive this engine very much, like do the absolute minimum miles on it, because it's a really good, strong engine. We don't want to tire it out. So all the testing was done in the test car, but because Brock knew he had this really good engine and the car was good, it was basically a new car, he won it before he even got in the seat, you know. So, I mean, that was the start of the thing, and it just went on from there.
We're quite happy. So all he's got to do is keep the car on the track. I guess, yeah. Yeah, simple as that.
I remember that we had done a total of 27 laps prior to the race beginning, from the time the car arrived from John Shepherd's immaculate race headquarters. That included going out, seeing if the car works all right, qualifying it to get into the top 10, Jim Richards qualifying to get into the race, myself going out there and doing the shootout and getting pole, and then going out there, that includes the out laps, the flying lap and the in laps. And that car sat there having done a total of 27 laps and having accomplished all of that. I'm sure no other race team has done that before or since. It was just staggering when you think about it. It did have a definite advantage over everyone else. It just worked beautifully. And it's one of those weekends which is a race driver's dream. But, you know, at the end of it all, it probably didn't mean as much to me as some of the other races which were more challenging and more difficult. And even the races that I haven't won, somehow they might stick in your subconscious a little longer because of the struggle and the complexity and the issues you had to overcome. That weekend was amazing. I mean, the car just cleared off into the distance.
Peter Brock, 0-5 for the Marlborough Holden dealer team, comes across the mountain. The man who has conquered the mountain 3 times and staring a fourth in the face. Here he comes. Listen to the applause, the accolades for a man among men when it comes to race car drivers. Still tidy. Picks up the inside rear wheel that time. Peter Brock is trying hard in this last lap.
People have said to me at different times, what possessed you to break the lap record on the last lap? Well, I can tell you I tried the year before in 1978. And if anyone looks at the footage, that final lap, they'll notice me coming down behind one of the Gulsons in their Alfa Romeo at the Dipper. And I've caught up behind them and I'm going, quick, quick, let me by, let me by. And I remember one of the Gulsons coming up to me later on saying, what were you doing, waving your arms at us, trying to get by as the last lap? I said, I was trying to break the lap record. I said, what? So in 1978, I missed out by a 15th. It was probably a few tenths of a second. On 79, I had added reason because one Alan Moffat, his car had broken down. He was driving those Camel Falcon hardtops. And I knew he was on that, doing the TV commentary, and Moffat would be saying, Peter will hear every little squeak and rattle, and he'll be going slow now, just to make sure it gets over that hill, you know. And I thought, I'll show him. I gave it plenty. and I knocked off the lap record in that last lap, and it was just, you know, it would add icing on the cake.
Back through the gears. Listen to the crowd warming up. A checkered flag unfolds, a page in history as Peter Brock in the Marlborough Holden dealer team comes across to take the checkered flag.
The winner of this year's Hardy Parado, and now he has 4 victories in Australia's greatest race, Peter Brock.
There has never been a performance that dominant. They won by 6 laps, which is the equivalent to, what, 37, 38 kilometres. Never headed in the race. Fastest in practice, pole position, fastest race lap on the last lap of the race. That was just total domination. And really, when you think about Bathurst now with the introduction of the safety car, the chances of anyone being able to win by 6 laps in the 1,000 race are virtually 0 to 0. So that is a record that will stand for all time, and so it should.
General Motors had introduced its new family car, the Commodore, in 1978. And in the following year, the car entered motorsport, but not on the racetrack. The Holden dealer team started 3 cars in the 20,000 kilometre Round Australia Repco Reliability Trial. The result was a stunning success for Holden and HDT. In a huge field, their cars finished 1, 2, 3, with that man, Brock, leading the way.
When people ask me what is my most indelibly imprinted memory of motorsport, it is without any shadow of doubt the 79 Repco Reliability Round Australia Trial. It was the single most difficult, challenging motoring event you could imagine. Debut of the Commodore in competition, bleak times out there in the motoring industry. John Loveridge, who was the successor to John Bagshaw, decided that he'd have to wipe all the doom and gloom off the pages, and there was an energy crisis type issue going on, and put some excitement and fun back into the whole world of you know, how people viewed motoring. And so the decision was made to run the Commodore. That in itself was a gutsy decision. I remember being at Lang Lang one day with the Tiranas putting on a Holden dealer team day. I think we might have had some Geminis there that George was preparing too for rallies at the time. And I drove a prototype mule Commodore. One of the engineers had it. He said, take it for a drive around here, Brocky, and put it over that, you know, the dirt road around the back of the ride and handling track, and I did. And it was just stunning over those yumps and that. I thought, my God. I came in, I pulled up next to George. I said, George, get in. This is our next rally car. This is the one for the Round Australia trial. We're going to talk Holden into it. And of course, this is a long time before the trial actually began. We drove her in the back there, and he said, this is fantastic. So we came back in then and said to Holden, we've got to use this car in the Round Australia trial. It'll be awesome. And that's where the seed was planted, I guess, at that time. And then, of course, as it unfolded, Holden said, let's get behind this and really make it work. George was just fantastic when it came attention to detail and the vision of how logistically he was going to handle the whole thing. His ability is just, well, you know, second to none. I don't think I've ever seen any event of that magnitude organised to a greater detail than George. He'd sit there plotting and scheming. He'd have all these graphs and pencils and notes and everything else, and an army of dedicated people around him. When you consider the cars went out there with their debut motorsport event, they finished 1, 2, 3 outright. People thought it was almost orchestrated. There were rumours abounding that Peter Brock caught helicopters to get in from A to B at different times, so he was freshened up for the next stage. I thought, I only wish I was wiped out. 14 days, 21,000 kilometres. I was just a skeleton at the end of that, but I had the sniff of victory around about Darwin, and I thought, oh, I can win this. I'd learnt this rally stuff. I'd had half a lap of Australia to sort of figure it out. And once I got to that stage, I thought, yeah, I'm just so focused on doing it. I sleep deprivation, etc. I just did it purely on adrenaline. Great result though, because that established Commodore as a really reliable, strong car for Australian conditions, particularly as it had a McPherson strut front end. And that was, of course, a controversial issue in those earlier days about, was it going to be strong enough? Did this car have the strength of the good old Kingswood? Well, it proved it in spades. I remember coming down up the Birdsville track there at one stage, middle of the night, and came around a curve. I was probably doing about 170, 190 clicks, wound up, in top gear. And it went over a yump, which middle of the night you really couldn't see it. It was a bit of a spoon train, I guess, and it took off, and it went along for what seemed an eternity on its bull bar, and the bull bar didn't quite dig in. It just sat there, and it eventually just landed back on the wheels and started jumping again. And it jumped so hard and so high and so it landed so badly that we thought that was the end of the rally. And I remember putting it into neutral and giving it a few revs, couldn't hear the fan hitting anything. Put it into gear, went through the gears, the gearbox seemed okay. Put it into first, drove off through the salt bush, back on the road, brr, brr, little XU1 motor, ripping along, and forgot about it until I was standing at a service point where a lot of press were, and all the press came up and said, what's this ripple in the roof just above the driver's head? And if you look at the car nowadays, it's still there, the same one. And I said, oh, you wouldn't believe that, I said. I was standing there and this Ford guy came up and said, God, you're in front, Brock, you bloody Brocky. And he bashed the roof so hard with his fist. Look at the dent he put in it. That's just a Ford executive who could dirty on us Holden blokes.
After so much success, observers may have been surprised when Holden decided to withdraw its support for the Holden dealer team in 1980, saying it didn't make sense for the factory to compete against private entrants driving their vehicles. John Shepherd resigned and Peter Brock and John Harvey were left without a team.
Effectively, the team was available to purchase. I mean, John Shepherd didn't want to buy it. For his own reasons, it was a lot of money. We talked about it and we decided Peter should buy it. And I'm sure Peter had to borrow some money to do that. But that was part of it. But then it became the Holden dealer team, which it always was, but it was financed by the dealers. And that was the catalyst that started HDT Special Vehicles. The dealers agreed to finance the team on the basis that Peter start a special vehicles operation and use his racing knowledge and experience to develop some cars for the road that would appeal to the punters. So that's where it all came from. But of course the difficult part for the marketing department and the PR department was to actually explain how it had always been known as the Holden dealer team, but now it really was the Holden dealer team who were paying for it.
A couple of people came to me, dealers. I guess Vin Keane was one of the prime movers. And Reg Hunt. Certainly there was another two or three that initially said, this is too good to let drop. We shouldn't let it drop. We've got to keep it going. So I started talking to them and we went to a number of dealers and put it to them about helping out funding the team, from it, making it truly a dealer team. And they said, yeah, we will, but we want to be able to generate some income. We need some cash flow. We need some sort of incentive. Can you build some special road cars for us, limited edition stuff, and we'll consider it. So I began HDT Special Vehicles. And the idea was, let's build some cars, reward those dealers who kicked the tin for our race program.
It was a very busy time for everybody involved. I mean, the race team personnel were basically isolated from it, because, as they should have been and were. But for Peter and I and the other people involved in the company, which was starting to get bigger and bigger, HDT Special Vehicles, it was a very busy time. I mean, there was a time when you'd go to a race meeting and probably there might have been a party or some function on the Sunday night and you'd fly home on Monday sometime. Once we were involved with HDT, from 1980 on, we were out of there on the first flight on Sunday nights and at work at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. And that continued for many, many years. But the company expanded and the cars were very well received all the way through.
And so began HDT Special Vehicles, producing high-performance Holden cars for retail customers and at the same time continuing the race program. But there was still the issue of sponsorship to deal with.
When I went to Simmons Plains with the very first Commodore on the racetrack that we'd had to cobble up, we began to cobble it up with John Shepherd in the latter part of 79, but we had a lot of work to do. Anyway, we got it on the track and we filled around there, and guess what? Simmons Plains, we won the race. What an incredible debut for the team and for Commodore in circuit racing. I mean, it was just staggering when you think about it, because the time we just said, oh, well, you know, got the car there, got the result, beauty. I had no sponsorship when I went down there. I had nothing. Philip Morris had not committed. I had the signs on the car based on the fact that we'll do a pretty good job for you and we'll show you what we can do. They said, you show what we can do and we'll sponsor you.
The new arrangements worked brilliantly. With Brock now running the operation himself, he continued his winning ways on the track in the new VB Commodore, winning his third touring car title. As always, the icing on the cake for the season was the big race on the mountain. And for the third year running, Jim Richards successfully teamed up with Peter Brock.
Brock, Richards, the Marlborough Holden dealer team and their Commodore have no peers at Bathurst. They did it the hard way, but they did it well.
It was a bit of a fairy tale victory because we had damage to the car. I'd clobbered a bloke very early on the race. I was lapping a little Gemini, clipped him, and it didn't hurt the radiator, but it did require a quick pit stop to rip some bodywork off, get going again. But, you know, as it transpired, we stuck around, got the result.
Yes, we had a very, very tough battle today. It's an absolute credit to the guys behind the scenes.
It was just a terrific reward for a group of people who, I mean, we were proving ourselves. We were the new guard, if you like, at the time. And we weren't the old guard by any stretch of the imagination, and we had to prove that, hey, us young guys can do it.
But it's Dick Johnson from Queensland who for the first time draws the cheers of the crowd, and the Ford flags are out.
In the early 80s, Dick Johnson was also achieving success in his Falcon and Alan Moffat with his Mazda RX-7. The Commodores were facing new challenges, but were still winning races. Brock teamed up with Larry Perkins to win again on the mountain in 1982, and then again in 1983.
We had the ability of doing enduro races, but shorter races, tight tracks, Amaroo and goodness knows what, that Mazda was driving us nuts. And its exhaust note in the pits, we'd go, oh, do we have to listen to this sound anymore? Get out of here, Moffat, get that Mazda and get... But when it came to the mountain, yeah, we got the chocolates at the mountain ride.
Through the gears, he's done it. He's put 7 on the board. Peter Brock wins the 1983 James Hardy 1000 at Mount
The 1983 victory at Bathurst was credited to 3 drivers for the first time, but Peter Brock did not finish in the car he started with.
Hello, 05, Peter Brock is in the pits. Well, one sensation after another in this race. The leader of the race coming in very slowly too.
Perkins and Brock were cross-entered in both HDT cars. And when their engine failed, while leading after just 7 laps, they did what they were entitled to do under the rules. They took over the number 2 car.
That had happened before that 83 race with 3 drivers, or, you know, the second driver taking over the first car or vice versa. And that was within the rules, but what had never happened before, the car hadn't won the race. It had happened before, but nobody had taken any notice of it. So anyway, there's a lot of controversy about that, but we'd have talked about it the night before and the year before and so on, as long as those rules had been in. Not expecting that would happen. And I think I was running second at the time. Peter had some problem, I forget exactly what it was, engine problem. I got the signal from the pits that Peter was out, so I knew what was happening, that they would call me in. And that's what happened. And I got out of the car on, I think, about lap 25 or 6 or something like that, with the car in second place. And Peter took over. And the only disappointment I had was the fact that I never got back in the car on the day. But at the end of the day, it really didn't matter. I'd started the car, I'd qualified it well, and I think we had a pretty good chance of winning the race anyway. But so I won it.
So it was a good party that night?
It was a very good party that night.
And the crowd really giving Peter Brock a send-off. The last trip of the V8 Big Bangers, as they're called, the Group C touring cars, and Brock has done it again.
In 1984, the Holden dealer team was still winning. It was the final year of the Group C regulations, unique to Australian tin tops. And although the team didn't win the championship because Brock had spent some time campaigning in Europe, he did achieve a memorable 1-2 with John Harvey on the mountain.
Peter Brock in 05 comes across the line to win the 1984 James Hardy 1000.
Holden dealer team had decided we were going to go and have a go at Le Mans. So we took the whole crew over and we rented a Porsche, Le Mans car. And we didn't win Le Mans, but we gave it a fair shake. But while we're over there, the guys were all sitting back there talking about how we're going to win Bathurst again, and we said, OK, let's build some new cars. So by remote control, we started getting some body shells and getting them prepped and stuff like that. So when we came back, around about July-ish, we started, getting these cars together. They didn't cost a great deal of money in those days because they were very simple sort of formula, Group C. I love Group C, made a lot of sense. And we debuted those cars with a brand new colour scheme, which has become quite legendary actually, this clean, simple, day-glow sort of colour that the cars have. And everyone stood back, I guess, when we unveiled them and said, wow, they look good. And it has been, even in this day and age, voted as being one of the best looking Holdens around. Or in fact, some magazines said, best looking Holden racing car ever, best looking Holden ever. I thought, it's a fairly big statement, but the cars went as good as they looked. And we won Sandown. Bit of a struggle at Sandown. We used different tyres there, but we learned a bit from that, and we went to Bathurst and we had all guns blazing up there, I can tell you, and we cleared out. And it took a while to establish the supremacy, but we got there and we had a 1-2, a very memorable 1-2 with John Harvey and Skippy Parsons behind Larry and I. So it was just a wonderful finale to what I think was a great era in sport, and that was the Group C regulations. I think they gave us some great racing.
The amount of recall the fans have for those day-glow orange and white cars is extraordinary. Even today, people will talk about things like Alan Moffat's Mustang or whatever, but the VK day-glow Commodores are right up there in people's memory, which is quite extraordinary considering they only competed at one Bathurst 1000. I think the reason why people love those cars is there's a number of factors involved in that. One, it was the last year of Group C racing in Australia, which was the Australian domestic formula. It had been through its ups and downs for sure, but I think it was a fairly emotional time to see the last of the big bangers, as they called them, the big Aussie V8 Falcons and V8 Commodores going out. And the way those cars were presented, it was very clear that it was like, we're going to go out with a bang, and that's the wording Brock has used before. The cars were beautifully prepared, they were lovely and simple, they were the lightest, simplest, fastest Commodores they'd ever built, and that day-glow orange paint job, like no one had seen anything like that in Australian motorsport. I think, if you think of 1984 and the way those cars were presented and the way the team were presented, they were the equal of anything in the world, Formula One, Champ Car Racing, what you like, they were right at the top of the tree.
The 84 car was sensational, the day-glow cars, fantastic cars to drive. And then after that, we basically went to the Group A formula. And it might seem funny, but in 85, whilst the Holden had been homologated to run in the Group A formula, no one at that point had built an Evolution car, which was allowable under the rules. There just hadn't been time. So in 85 we went to Bathurst, Peter and I made the comment after the race that I said, Peter, the two HDT road cars that we drove to Bathurst this year were faster than the race cars. I mean, the race cars in terms of lap time are a little bit quicker because of slick tyres and so on, but basically the engines in 85 were stock standard, and the Achilles heel there was the stock standard timing chain was a weak point, and in the race condition, and broke on both cars.
And I think I heard someone shout, "Forget it." They're racing, and Walkinshaw gets a blinder, but so too does Johnson, and Johnson will split them, and so does Grice.
New Group A regulations in 1985 meant a big change in the motorsport landscape and the emergence of the turbos and Jim Richards in his BMW 635.
Well, Group A was a formula developed to be a global formula, and therefore you could take your Holden car to Europe and race on equal terms, and they could come to Australia and any other country, and on paper it all sounded terrific. And initially it was pretty good. However, the problem was, as the evolution process took hold and people were building evolution cars on a regular basis, which was putting an awful strain on the manufacturers, and in our case at Holden, a big strain on the engineering staff, and race teams being race teams wanted a new, faster car every season. And when you consider that you had to build 500 of these cars and they had to be certified and ADR to be sold brand new on the showroom floor, that was a huge task for a company like Holden and lots of other companies. But to cut a long story short, at the end of the day, Ford produced the Sierra turbo car, which took them a couple of years to get it developed. Once they got it developed, well, that was the car to have. It was the quickest car. And of course, that was a bit of a problem in Australia. It wasn't too bad in England and Europe, but in Australia, they didn't sell Sierras here. So all of a sudden, all the Ford teams obviously had to go to a Sierra. They're not sold in Australia, so there wasn't much value for Ford. Holden were getting done because the V8 Holden just wasn't a match for them. But the thing that brought it undone in the end was basically manufacturers around the world said this is all too hard. It's taking too much of our engineering resources and marketing resources to build these evolution cars, and so the whole thing collapsed.
It was a difficult time because the switch to international Group A regulations were not really built around helping out the Australian cars. Not because the European rules had any problem with Australians, it's just that the V8 Commodores and the V8 Falcons under those rules were pretty much handicapped in terms of the amount of tyre width they had relative to the amount of power they had relative to the weight of the car. Compared to some of these European cars like BMWs, Jaguars, even the Volvos with their turbocharged engines, the Commodores were always fighting with one hand tied behind their back. So Holden had to do some very clever thinking in terms of slightly reducing the capacity of their V8 engine so that the car dropped into a lower weight group. There was all sorts of little fiddles going on there trying to make the Commodore competitive. And it must be said that against those European thoroughbreds, they did a very, very good job. When they took those Commodores overseas for some of those European Touring Car Championship rounds, they absolutely thrilled the European fans, and they were very, very fast. So even though it was a very difficult time for Holden, they did an absolutely admirable job.
Well, Brock's just given me the thumbs up. It's the usual confident, happy and positive Peter Brock who's in the car at the moment. He's gone at the time of about 25 seconds, and he is gassing in the Commodore. He's put slick tyres on.
Early in 1987 came the stunning announcement that Holden was ending its hugely successful association with Peter Brock and the Holden dealer team over a device Brock wanted to install in his modified vehicles, called a polarizer. HDT would continue to race without factory support for the remainder of the year, and Brock recorded another win at Bathurst in the VL Commodore after the two leading Sierras were disqualified. But it was the last hurrah for HDT.
Well, there was a bit of a split, and everyone knows about the split with Peter Brock and Holden. It's been certainly well documented, and it goes into a number of detailed factors in terms of the way he was running the business and whether that was within the fold of General Motors and whether they agreed with what he was doing. He wasn't. There was a split. It was inevitable that it was going to happen. So Holden then was stuck with a situation where they no longer had a Holden dealer team. They no longer had this iconic works team to continue their motorsport program. So over a period of time, they came up with an idea where they were going to put it out to tender who wanted to run their local motorsport program. A number of teams put their hand up, and one of those was Tom Walkinshaw Racing, based in England, but very, very successful in terms of touring car programs with other manufacturers, including Jaguar and Rover and so on. So they put their hand up, they got the deal, and that was the beginning of the Holden racing team and Holden special vehicles.
The Holden dealer team story is special in Australian motorsport history. The racing scene may have changed forever, but the Ford-Holden rivalry continues, and those distinctive HDT cars will never be forgotten.
It was a good name, I mean, the dealer team. Like, it's Holden Racing Team these days, but there are many, many, many people who refer to Holden Racing Team as the dealer team. And these are people that probably come from that era or were young kids growing up in that era. And they talk about, I mean, racing with Holden Racing Team in recent times. I'll say, good to see you with the dealer team, Brocky, you know, that sort of word. So it's quite extraordinary. So it's part of the heritage of Australian motorsport is indelible. It's extraordinarily important. And yes, it was sad to see the demise because it should have gone out there with a big press release to say, final race of HDT, it's now becoming Holden Racing Team. But in fact, Holden Racing Team lives, and it is the modern day equivalent of Holden Dealer Team. It has much of the heritage and the passion that fueled Holden Dealer Team all those years ago.
We were the farmer's car, we were the car for the family, we were the family car, but you know, all the young people used to say, God, I'm not buying one of those things, you know. My granddad drives those things. Now, the one thing the Holden Dealer team managed to do is shift that whole opinion where, you know, anyone you talk to today, even kids today, even if they don't buy a Holden, they still say, hey, it's either the Commodore or the Ford that's going to win Bathurst or going to do this. There's that image, that image that it's a real with it car. And that's the thing that we wanted to do at the time.
We started a whole new ball game. We brought big business into motorsport. We brought presentation, team gear, going to supermarkets, television ads. We brought a whole new scene into motorsport. We won all the championships and everything in 1 year. That was never done before, and it will never be done again.
Throughout those 2 decades, just allowing for the odd little blimp, that team was consistently successful, consistently competitive. No matter whether it was under Harry Firth, under John Shepherd or under Peter Brock, Holden Dealer Team were always at the top of the tree. Now that is an extraordinary achievement.